Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you doing? My name is Mustafa Akben. If you haven't met, welcome. This is our AI research and networking series event, and we are trying to build bridges between among interdisciplinary research, and we are aiming to highlight the AI research, interdisciplinary AI research that our amazing faculty, researchers on campus doing at Elon. And one of the purpose, again, highlight the impressive work has been done at Elon University. We already hosted a couple of different departments from business, communication schools, and other psychology, and we are hosting a few people from writing groups next week. And the goal of this network and research initiative is encourage this interdisciplinary dialogue to identify how we can just collaborate and share idea. That is one of the nice common part, many people interested in this AI research here. Create opportunities for joint projects, and also, most importantly, that is a strategic goal of this AI research network. If you're new here, currently federal governments and other research institutions provide some grant for AI, and we are aiming to receive some grant for our creative ideas on campus. And indeed, there are a couple of interesting development happening we all observe currently. However, still there is a support for the AI research, interestingly. So when you look at these UN's National Science Foundations, they have been providing AI research support. Indeed, this is a new kind of grant. Last 10 years, they have been giving this grant, or 5, 6, 8 years, and they called AI Research Center grants. And when you look at that, there was a recent research recipient, AI Institution for Engaged Learning, NC States, and they received $15 million. So first, great job, and they are amazing. They're putting a lot of good work. Second, engaged learning associated with Elon, am I right? And that kind of prompted me to ask why we are not have such AI institution for engaged learning or alternative centers. That is to say, this is preemptive, but I'm going to share these details. Eric Hall, Provost, we have been talking with possible partnership with external grant partners, and we are going to send you an email about that, and hopefully you can just join these discussions and dialogue and conversations so that you can we can partner with this application, grant application. Apart from that, if you haven't applied, we have an AI pedagogy challenge. That is to say, you can apply for AI pedagogy idea, you submit it, and you can receive immediate access to ChatGPT pilot programs, almost a year. You're going to be part of the Elon workspace. And finally, we have already done a few talks here, and we are right now having Dr. Shannon Zenner from Communication Design Department. I'm going to read something nice here. Everything is nice indeed. So, Dr. Shannon Zenner is Assistant Professor of Communication Design at Elon University, whose research bridges the visual communication, political psychology, AI research. Her work explores how design elements shape political messaging and AI, public perception, with a growing emphasis on artificial intelligence in the visual analyses. Indeed, we have been exchanged a couple of conversations, and we just discovered there are a couple of intersections, my research area, how AI shape our creativity, and her research area. We are going to today learn about how AI shape credibility of research, if I'm not wrong. Please join me to welcome Shannon.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm super excited, but I'm also now nervous knowing that there's a stats person. When we get to my stats, you're gonna be as forgiving as possible, okay? Remembering that although I have a PhD, I teach in communication design, right? Okay, so we'll remember that. So this study was about AI-generated images and their effect on credibility, which is something, of course, that in journalism is something that's very much fundamental to everything they do. We all know about that attack on credibility and what that means. This is not my study alone. I'm doing it, or I've conducted it with Tara Mortensen out of South Carolina, Laura Rule at UNC Chapel Hill, where I did my PhD, and Lee Rainey, as many of you know, who is in our, I always get it wrong, Reimagining the Digital Internet something, amazing name, yeah. I should practice that better. Okay, so I really like that name is great, but I think this is really more like I can totally spot an AI image, except when I can't, which is the sort of feeling that we're getting from most people when we talk about how to do this. By the way, if you want to join, you can scan the QR code, or you can go to canva.live and enter this code. I'll have a little poll in here where we're going to play a game. We're going to have a pop quiz and see how you guys do. And you can use your phone for this. Okay, I have not used this before, so I'm testing this out. This is just like Poll Anywhere. I don't know if you guys have used that. I know the library folks are probably pretty familiar and have taught everybody else how to use it. This is built into Canva, so I'm giving it a try to see how it works. Also because I think it's fun and engaging, and of course, engaged learning happens at Elon, right, Mustafa? Yeah. So if you want to join, you'll see there's also a live Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen, and you can, ask questions there if you want to, and chat with each other as we go through this. Okay. So I'm just going to ask you simply whether or not you think this is AI or human. Go ahead and vote. I'm going to show you a series of images. Is it working? Please work. If not, no big deal, not the end of the world. And of course, it does not appear to be working. Is it not showing up for you? Well, see, this is the problem. Okay, we'll do it by hand then. Okay, so this is how I did the old-fashioned way. Okay, so raise your hand if you think this is an AI image. Okay, and who thinks it's human? Oh, we're pretty split. It's human. It's interesting to see who's good at this and not. I'm going to hedge my bets, but I'm guessing this gentleman right here will probably be pretty good, and that gentleman back there. So if you want to follow their guidelines, the photographer and artist, right? Okay, what about this one? AI or human? Hands up for AI. Human? You're like 50-50. Let's just do it. AI. Okay, AI or human? AI, and who thinks it's human? Okay, human. AI or human? AI, who thinks it's AI? And who thinks human? Yeah, AI. So what about these? What about when we put them head to head? Does that make a difference? Image A, is that AI, or is image B the AI? Okay, look for a second. Okay, what about image A? Do you think that's the AI? Raise your hand. And who thinks image B is the AI then? Okay, A is the AI. Good job. Yeah, the key is to look at the kind of way that the spots are too even in the top one, apparently. Right? This depends. Let's see how you do in this one. And then I'm gonna ask you why you guessed what you guessed. Okay, who thinks image A is AI? Okay, and who thinks image B is AI? Okay, a couple of you are still like, I have no idea. Yeah? What did you look at if you thought that A was AI? What was the clue? Randy's got it. It's the hands, right? Yeah. The weird finger on the little girl, right? So that's part of what people are being taught, right? Pay attention to the eyes. Pay attention to the hands. It's so funny. The image that I gave Sagun to put on the flyer is an AI headshot of me. I've been using it. It has two pupils in one eye as like a little thing to see if anybody pays attention. And I was at a big conference and somebody was like, your image has two pupils, right? I was like, yes, okay. And then I brought out the prize and gave it to them. It was super fun. But then one of my colleagues got the email to come to this, and she said, oh my God, your headshot's so beautiful. Oh, you look so good. I haven't seen you in a while. You're looking great. I was like, thanks, it's AI. She's like, no, please don't tell anybody I thought that. Okay, what about, let's see. Oh, we're going backwards, not forwards. What about this one? Was this shot by a photographer or was it shot by AI? Take a look. Okay, who thinks this image is AI? Oh, Randy. I know, it's hard. Okay, what about this one? AI or photographer? I'll tell you the results in a second. Okay, what if I ask you to choose that one is AI and the other one's photographer? Okay, which of these do you think is AI? A or B? Okay, who thinks A is AI? And B? Who thinks B is AI? The answer is B is the AI image. So what is to be had from this? This is the actual set of images that we used for our experiment. So the image on the bottom I produced in Midjourney, and the image on the top is an award-winning photographer who shoots for Getty Images. That picture on the top was used in the Washington Post, New York Times, AP, all over the place, right? Lots of local newspapers picked it up. And I started with the real image, used ChatGPT to produce a prompt. I said, tell me what you see in the image. What would I need to prompt Midjourney to get a similar image? And then I took that prompt and popped it into Midjourney. I went through a couple of different variations and ended up using this image. We liked it for a number of reasons, and we also really only focused on kind of one topic. In this case, it was about the border, right? So when we were thinking about this, we were thinking about what do we want to know about how disclosure when we use AI can impact us? When can it be seen as a positive thing, and when can it be actually really damaging to credibility? Because I think the instinct is, let's label everything that's AI as AI, right? That'll be good. That seems to be the right thing to do, right? That's ethical. And we're also encouraging our students to use AI, right? But what if, hear me out, AI and its use could be negative, and people could perceive you as cheating. I mean, certainly when we ask our students about this, a lot of them feel like being even asked to use AI is cheating or unethical, right? So if they're encouraged to, well, what if I don't want to, right? So there's some back and forth with this that we think is really interesting. And I think part of why this matters is, of course, how AI images are being used. So I think most of these you'll probably be familiar with, especially the top one. During the campaign, Donald Trump actually posted, or reposted and shared, mostly on Truth Social, more than 25 posts about Taylor Swift and the Swifties for Trump, which was all clearly labeled as satire, which wasn't, in fact, real, and then just polluted the understanding, right? So the problem is, it's not necessarily that the satire went up in the first place that was bad. It was how it was then used to cloud the market, right? Other places where we're seeing AI used, we've seen groups like CNET use it early on. So they were doing it in 2023. They actually didn't really disclose their use. They did it very much like a buried disclosure where you had to click on something to see that they were using AI, and then were caught by some other groups and organizations and found out that there were 41 of their 77 AI written stories actually had corrections that they then had to publish and say, hey, we need to correct this. So there was a lot of backlash with that. We have also seen backlash in a commercial standpoint. My background's in advertising, so I'm always paying attention to what's going on there, and AI art is a real issue there, sparking lots of criticism and backlash, of course, for artists themselves and people who create this art, but also just the quality of it. So the Coca-Cola ad, people had issues with the use of AI in general, but also then just went all over the place about how it had that AI look and feel. But we also see some organizations like Pentagram Design, which is one of the world's most famous design firms out of New York City. Paula Scher, the designer for this particular piece, did a performance.gov site where you can go on and you can see all of this really amazing kind of illustrative pieces that are very abstracted. And they used AI to do it, and they made it very visible, right? It's part of how they've been promoting it. And so that's been getting some feedback, but also praise for their transparency. So I think like it sort of matters how you disclose your AI use. It also matters. We have seen some recent research, and this wasn't included in the paper we submitted because it just came out. Benjamin Toff, who's at Minnesota, did a study with Poynter where he talked about how audiences feel about AI and how it's being used in journalism. And what was interesting was that 61% of people believe that AI is being used by journalist outlets, by media. So they already think that we're using it all the time. I think it's absolutely incredible that when they asked about like writing articles, the content, research, but they also asked specifically about the photos, and people thought that it was that often. They also said they don't trust AI in journalism. I think that's a lot less surprising, right? Only 21% expressing that people in news would use AI images in a way they would feel like trustworthy about it. And then 57% of them saying they have little or no confidence in the news outlet's ability to use AI. And then when they asked them, do people want AI use labeled, right? Should they disclose it? 56% said it's important to disclose AI. Again, I don't think that's the surprising one. The one that gets me is that first one. They already think it's being done. Like, that's just crazy. So when we did some research and we are writing our lit review, some of the things that we found is, of course, that journalism is something, or credibility is something central to journalism. It's part out of all of the ethics when we look at the NPPA, which is the National Photographers Press Association, or we look at some of the other guidelines that are written. Ethics and credibility are at the core of that. Audiences, how they perceive image credibility, that's all about how we source the image, but also how it's attributed, right? Like how we write that attribution, the language we use, where that attribution is located, what it looks like, and then the platform or source that it's on, right? So if I am seeing an image and it's on Fox News and I'm a Fox News watcher and proponent, I might trust that more than if I have it on New York Times, and vice versa, depending on how you kind of align yourself with that media source. And then photojournalistic images are often rated as more credible than stock, right? So we know that stock, user-generated content, that's part of what we're seeing more and more. And this is sort of where we find that AI is kind of replacing stuff, right? We didn't use stock images or use a kind of topic that would be the sort of thing that a news outlet would use stock for. But I can see that being the first place that they'll be replacing their AI. They'll replace all that stock photos kind of use. The other thing that we looked at is this idea of how images, when they're AI generated, are actually, we're finding, processed faster. And that might be why some of you actually thought the AI generated image was the one that didn't, that seemed like it was the journalist's image, but we're not quite sure. We also think that there's this truthiness effect that's going on. There's been some early research on that. AI-generated images tend to spread rapidly, and so they're really hard for people to detect. And of course, as the technology improves, that's changing things too. And then finally, audiences are really averse to anything they think is AI-authored content, right? So even when it's really high quality, they're just like, oh, it's AI, then I'm not going to trust it. So that idea of distrusting it, they've been told that it makes, it hallucinates, even though, again, it's improving all the time. We also find that disclosure of any kind can oftentimes decrease credibility, even for something that would be a really authentic visual. And that's what our research really kind of tends to reinforce. You'll see in a second. People misidentify AI visuals more than 30% of the time, which you guys just experienced yourselves, right, in our pop quiz. Real images often being mistaken for AI too, so the vice versa happening. And so any kind of disclosure, even though it signals transparency, can trigger this kind of skepticism affecting people, right? So they're like, if you're having to disclose that, what does that mean about all the other images, right? What does that mean about you as an organization? And that's kind of where we were really interested. And it really seems like we think if you are more digitally literate, then that should kind of change things, but it doesn't always, even though some people are trained to rely on these kind of source cues. Now, Now, you couldn't zoom in on the images I showed you, but we'll see also like people will want to kind of zoom in and they know what to look for. They can get trained in that, it helps. So we had 3 hypotheses. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to be clear, we just sort of like labeled images as photojournalists taken or as AI generated. We also looked at a news source being affected by this, and then we looked at if the image is labeled as this, will it change how we think the visual quality is it, right? Do we think the AI image is better quality or not as good quality based on how we labeled it? We also had some RQs that looked at things like attribution effects, right? So how is it attributed? If I mismatch that attribution, what happens then? Those audience characteristics, do we see any moderating effects in terms of individual differences? And then are people able to just detect, right? So let's just run that again and see what happens. So we did a national sample, and Lee Rady was gracious enough to support this research that we were able to get 1,500, but with adjustments, 1,488 people participating in our experiment. But we also started with a pilot that was eye tracking with interviews that we're still kind of conducting. We piloted at the beginning, and now we're continuing to work on it. I don't have a great deal of data from that, but I'll show you a couple of little insights that we've gotten. And that was eye tracking with interviews. So we did what are called retrospective think aloud interviews, where you show the people after they do the eye tracking, you're like, okay, now you're going to rewatch your eye tracking, and you're going to walk me through what you were thinking as you looked at this. So the interviews, in some ways, that qualitative research part of it, that qualitative data can be even more insightful than the heat maps and gaze plots can be. We conducted that with students from Elon and UNC Chapel Hill, and one of the things that was really cool about that is we realized, oh my God, we're priming the students because we were only asking them about the images and what they thought of the images, and so they were immediately suspect because they've all been trained like, oh, you're trying to trick me. So even though we would tell them like this is a photojournalist generated image, right, a photojournalist shot this photo, they didn't believe us. Even after we disclosed at the end of the experiment, they were so doubtful. They were like, what? No, that can't be true. Are you sure? But the thing looked weird, and that wasn't right. And they had all sorts of things. It was really difficult to even get them to like break out of that bias that they had already had in being really skeptical of this kind of thing. So I wanted to just show you real quickly a little bit of the eye tracking and interview results. So you can sort of see this. And then we'll talk also about the method. The easiest way to show you the method is just to break it out this way. So we did 2 types of images. You've already seen those. The photojournalist image, the AI image. And then we attributed them in different ways. So we attributed it as being taken by a photojournalist. So the AI image, but it says it was taken by a photojournalist. We said created by AI. We did that for both image types. And then we also did, just on the prolific, we did no attribution at all. So what happens if we remove the attribution? What's the effect or impact? And that's actually when you go on to Instagram, most news agencies, most media do not attribute images on their social media feeds, which is problematic for people like Randy, who are photographers, who need that. And also, we think, there's probably some pretty stiff rationale behind this. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So we used a desktop model instead of the on your phone model for this. They only had one image to look at instead of scrolling. So there's a lot of different things about this that make it a little bit less valid externally. But this was what we thought would give them the most time to really spend looking at the image to see what is it that they're actually seeing in this. So you'll notice that there is the attribution here. It tells us the name of the person who shot this. We used a very gender-neutral name. We listed as a staff photographer for a made-up media outlet that didn't exist, so that we wouldn't be, like if we did New York Times, we might be kind of triggering other kind of reactions. We also have that same attribution here in the caption, and the captions are identical besides that one change. This is exactly what it looks like if you go onto your desktop and you pull up Instagram. However, again, most people don't view Instagram that way. Certainly not the students that we had in our sample. So that was a little bit of a difference. But this way they could see the image and it would be much larger. Here's what it looked like when it was labeled as being generated by artificial intelligence. So you can see this is the staff photographer picture, but with a misattribution, right? So it says it was done by AI. Then we did the AI image, but with the AI label. Instead of saying, I don't know if you can see this, but on, Oops, I'm having trouble going back. Yeah, let me go here this way. So if you can see here, it says the photo was done by, right? But when we went to the AI, we said image generated. So we changed some of that language too. So that was very intentional. Instead of saying that it's a photo, we called it an image when we were talking about the AI. So then with no attribution at all, those were just removed. So here's what we learned. One of the things that we heard from a test participant, they said, I thought it was AI because the lighting was very interesting. And there's a lot of things about it that were not that typical. So that's from somebody who saw the photojournalist photograph. So we found that they were actually really skeptical of this kind of artistic aspect of that photograph. The very things that got it, made it award-winning, they felt like made it less real. So there's something about it being so high quality that actually they felt like that felt unreal to them. And I think we saw that when we did the faces, right, in our pop quiz. Some of you may have felt that way. One person said there's kind of a little bit of bias with it, I guess. It looks like it's coming like straight from a person's description rather than an actual image. Again, about the photojournalist image, not about the AI image. The other thing we saw was that when people saw that image, they wanted to spend a lot of time looking at the caption, and they felt like if the image and the caption didn't perfectly line up, that was another indicator that that was problematic. So in terms of what photojournalists and media outlets can take from it, that's one of the key things. They're really paying attention to that once they're skeptical of those images. This person told us exactly what we thought, was that they were going to look at faces, right, like eyes and hands. They said, I was looking at faces, and I was looking at the fence a lot, too. The image almost looked a lot like it was mysterious a little bit, and that's when I immediately thought it was because it was AI created. Now, these are all comments before we even tell them, right, that it's definitely a photojournalist or AI. They're very skeptical, and a lot of the ones who saw this, it was labeled as a photojournalist image. So this is one of the heat maps you can see here. The redder it is, the more time they spent there. So you can see they're kind of spending time in this is the image generated by or photo taken by the photojournalist. And notice here they're spending a lot of time on the face, and they're going back and forth. They've looked at everything too, which was interesting when they went back to talk about what they looked at. They were surprised at what they said. I didn't even notice the caption. I didn't even notice the attribution that was there. And then said, oh, I guess I did look at it. It just didn't even register with them. So even though it said it, a lot of times they ignored it. They didn't even notice that it was AI until we pointed it out. And then you can see them spending a lot of time reading here. They had about, I think it was 15 seconds to look at that, which is also very unnatural. Most people are not looking at that. In fact, most of our students don't even look at news on their social media feeds at all, right? This is another one here. You can see this is done by it tells us the photo is taken by a staff photographer. It's the staff photo picture. And you can see it's very similar here, but they're spending almost twice as long when it's AI. So I think that's pretty interesting. So let's talk about the quantitative stuff that we did. So we assessed, again, image attribution's effect on credibility, on the source credibility, which in this case was the Horizon Tribune, and then on how they perceive the image quality. And you can see we have some small effect sizes here, and again, stats person, please bear with me here, not my thing, okay? But we did have some statistically significant results. I'll show you a little bit more here. So what we saw was that the photojournalist labeled images were actually rated significantly higher than the same images labeled as AI. That's not surprising. But misattributing the photojournalist image as AI, right, so when they didn't match up, that actually lowered the credibility than the actual AI-generated image. So we saw kind of these kinds of big effects across, or these kinds of small effects across this. We also saw some effects on the news source. They weren't super different, except here you can see the photojournalist image that's labeled as AI is a little bit different than the AI labeled as AI, right? So these two are similar here. So AI-labeled images did not differ significantly from journalist-labeled images, but when we attributed those images, we saw changes in to photojournalists, we saw higher news source credibility. Again, that's kind of consistent with what we were expecting. Photojournalists labeled images were also rated higher in what we thought of as, what we measured as perceived quality. So how, what's the quality of this photograph that you're looking at, this image that you're looking at? What do you think of it? And what was really interesting here was that the AI image performed pretty darn well compared to the one taken by the photojournalist. So AI-generated images also didn't really significantly differ when we changed that attribution. Okay, so we talked about misattribution. I'm not going to read through all of this, but just so you know, the misattributed real photo rated lower than correctly labeled AI image. So even if the image, a lot of times they liked that AI image a lot better. They thought it was better quality, they thought it felt more credible, it felt more true, more realistic, and that the other image looked fake and false. The absence of the attribution seemed to have no impact at all. So that was also interesting. So when we looked at it in terms of news source credibility, so when we remove it, it doesn't say who took this picture. It's just completely missing. There's no impact on news source credibility. So that might be part of the reasons why we're seeing that news organizations are leaving that off when they're posting their images on social media. AI-generated images without attribution were more credible than the ones with photojournalist image with attribution, which was interesting. I'm not really quite sure how to unpack that. I think that needs a little bit more research. Digital literacy, which we measured as things like how familiar you are with AI use, do you use Photoshop, are you a photographer, really didn't seem to moderate much at all. It had a small but slightly significant impact on credibility, but otherwise there was really no moderation by AI experience, again by that image, software, proficiency knowledge, that kind of thing. So they didn't really seem to impact this at all. We also looked at if they were able to do this accurately, right? Like how good were they? And you can see they weren't. So only about 11% correctly identified the AI-generated images as AI, and only about 24% correctly identified the photojournalist images. So then that's, again, not surprising, and as the technology gets better, we're gonna see that's even more of an issue, right? So if I can't even tell the difference, that attribution becomes really important. So what is that impact of not having it on there due to accuracy? We saw some different effects here. I don't think I need to do that. We also looked at political ideology, their trust in news in general, their skepticism of media to see if there was any kind of moderating effect. Also didn't seem to have much impact. Political ideology not making any difference. Trust in news media did predict credibility, but it didn't moderate the attribution effect. Skepticism in media, that one is actually predicting a little bit lower credibility rating, but again, not moderating the relationship. So those key takeaways are, when we take a look at these studies, what do they tell us? It tells us that attribution does affect perceptions, but not always in really predictable ways. That images without any attribution were sometimes rated as more credible, right, than those with AI or photojournalist labels. That's really concerning if you're a photojournalist, right? AI-generated images were perceived as higher quality, even though they were less credible when they were labeled as AI. So they're saying like, oh, that looks really good, I really like this, right? But I know I shouldn't trust that. Disclosure actually can backfire, that's the big one. It invites scrutiny and reduces trust even for real images. I think that's the real impact, right? So this AI kind of stuff is really impacting overall our feelings of trust towards anything. When we talk about this idea of transparency, audiences say that they want disclosure, but they distrusted those AI-labeled content, right? So you did this, but now I can't trust it again. I don't think these are really the kind of thing that we should be surprised by, but it's important to study to know. That aesthetic polish, and this was one that I thought was really important, actually signals inauthenticity in journalism. I've seen that. I did a study years ago where I did this with a piece of advertising, and people also said that they didn't think that they thought the quality of the really bad billboard that I made was actually better than the one that was really high quality that we teach our advertising students to make. There's something about this idea of polish that can turn people off, and I always think about the difference between a MAGA hat and the Clinton campaign or the Biden campaign, the Harris campaign, right? This very polished kind of aesthetic, and think about how it is standing up against those kind of MAGA-generated pieces. So people really feel like if you're spending a lot of money on something, or if it looks too good, then it may not be real. So labels really are essential, but they need to kind of evolve as we build trust. One thing I think is interesting, YouTube is actually looking at doing just labeling stuff as human-generated. They're not gonna label anything as AI. They're gonna assume everything's AI. And you have to actually click a box to say, no, this was fully human-generated. So I think that's kind of compelling too. What we think this means for newsrooms. So attribution alone isn't enough to maintain trust. They're gonna have to look for other ways to do that. I think they kind of know that. Audiences are forming new heuristics, right? Too perfect equals fake. Newsrooms, those need to kind of figure out what they're doing to do consistently, right? They need to be visible. They need to be very contextual when they're doing their AI labeling. And of course, journalists need to explore ways to disclose so that they can figure out how they can do it without penalizing credibility. I think it's also important to think about what is this going to mean over time, right? AI is still early days, but it's moving so quickly. The impact in a generation could be very different. So there's a lot of future research that we're looking at, that we're thinking about. First of all, we're continuing to do our eye tracking research to assess real-time credibility judgments and spending more time looking at all the data coming in from that. We're testing alternative forms of disclosure. We're looking at things like icons, hover tags, interactive credits. There's a lot of different studies already looking at this, but not with AI. We want to study different types of images, right? So we only did an image for a breaking news story that would be, a main story about the border. What happens if we do it about something that's a little bit less controversial? Or what is it if it's something a little bit more about business? Or will they have different effects and impacts there? We want to extend it to video and other content. We also want to investigate those kind of different types of styles. So there's this AI look and feel that people think is there, think they can, that'll clue them in. We're seeing even some interesting stuff with like what they're doing with artists, like the Studio Ghibli effect on memes, that type of thing. Exploring those long-term effects are really important. And then one other area that I think is really interesting that we want to look at is what happens when we disclose AI use in other areas, right? So if my design students, my advertising students disclose in their portfolios, what's going to be the impact on that? What's the impact on an artist versus somebody who is using it for writing? What's the difference if I'm using it and I have 30 years of experience versus a student? What's the difference if I use it for data analysis, right? Are there different impacts in terms of disclosure on each of those areas? So those are the big key takeaways, and that's my study, and thank you so much. I appreciate it.